Greetings from across the world. We are the St. Michael's and St. George's Marimba Band, all the way in South Africa in Makhanda. This performance will be opening the Teacher Tech Summit. We want to say a huge thank you and gratitude to all the schools and teachers for putting our children first. Hope you enjoy. Thank you.
One university in the United States conducted a study in Africa, and they said that we have over 100 years to catch up with the rest of the world.
We realized that our public school teachers needed huge upskilling. The main question is, could it be done by just starting from the basics?
The birth of this program was to support the teachers in their journey to embrace these new technologies that are coming into the classroom. The HPID program runs for a full academic year. We actually asked them to take on a project which they would like to prototype and solve a community problem.
This program seeks to help teachers build new concepts, have different skills in teaching their students. Let your innovation be something very simple that seeks to address a problem in your school. That will help every student you have.
We are teachers, we have our own intellect. So what they did for the whole of 1 year is they opened our minds to the possibilities.
Teachers recognize that they can be change makers in their classroom. When you have the framework, you can do anything.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vikas Pota. I'm the founder of T4. You know, when we talk about this subject, we often get two different, ends of this discussion that happen. One is around the power of technology and all the good that it can do, and the second being actually we don't need technology. And I'm quite surprised, even in this age that we've just gone through, and these very difficult times, that we can actually mount a defense or construct a case against the use of technology, when what we've seen is that by the use of it, we've been able to continue somewhat learning in systems all over the world, whether it be via WhatsApp, via radio, via TV, via online learning programs, software applications, and such forth. In fact, for a very long time, we have evangelized for the increased use of technology in education, and what's really happened, the pandemic has accelerated the adoption and the use of it. And the question that really we get asked all the time now is around, is this going to stick? And now that schools and classrooms have gone back, how can we actually incorporate technology and tools in our everyday practices, in our physical settings of schools? Now, I would love to put out there that I'm an expert, or I'm someone who knows what they're talking about. Somewhat that may be true. I'd like to think so. But there are others that actually should absolutely weigh in on this subject. And on our T4 TV platform, we do bring teachers, we bring school leaders, we bring policy experts, but we also want to bring representatives of not just a small startup EdTech innovative companies, but also the big tech companies and leaders from these, on the basis that there's a massive contribution to be made by all of us. Now, when I think about companies out there, especially when I think about big tech companies, I think about companies like HP, who we've devised a series with, which you will see over the next couple of months, of different types of conversations and celebrations that we will be hosting that talk about not just their commitment to education, but generally, how we should be thinking about education improvement as a whole. Now, if there's, many people look at the private sector, and in particular with the private sector, they often get very scared in terms of these guys are going to steal the shirts off my back. But actually, if you have the record of companies in particular, and if I take HP being one that actually started this technological revolution from a garage in the Bay Area in the US, which I visited, by the way, you just think about all the leaps and bounds that society has made as a result of it, and not just in a narrow way, but also, but particularly in a very wide-ranging way that we consume and we interact with each other. So it gives me great pleasure to bring on someone who I refer to as a friend, but actually when I think about everything that he says and does, is someone that I've enjoyed learning from greatly. Please welcome Mayank Dhingra of HP. Mayank, welcome.
Thank you so much, Vikas. Such a great introduction to the subject.
Again, it's one of those things, right, Mayank, in terms of when I think about technology in particular, the pandemic has certainly given us a boost. But actually, when I think about the role of the private sector, and you today represent one of the biggest companies in the world that is heavily engaged in the education sector. One of the things that I do admire greatly is rather than just speak narrowly about profits, dividends, and more and more in terms of market share, your company in particular has actually gone out and put out a very big and bold goal in front of people, which is encapsulated by this statement, which is you commit to accelerating digital equity for 150 million people by 2030, not too long to go. Do you want to speak a little bit about this commitment and where it stems from and why you've decided to actually take this angle to it? Of course, it's good for business, but why is it that you take a wider societal lens to this conversation?
I think as any large company today, we see ourselves being committed not just to profit, but to people and to the planet as well. And it's not good enough to have that commitment, behind the sort of corporate office facade, but we wanted to put it out there so that we are, accountable for it. And it's not just accelerating digital equity for 150 million people by 2030, but we also have learning better outcomes for 100 million people by 2025. And that's, even more around the corner. And besides that, we have many other such commitments that we have put out in the public space on climate and on justice and on fairness and inclusivity. So I think for us, all of this is part of our effort to make sure that we are seen as the most just and transformative technology company by 2030.
And so you nearly made a slip up in terms of the education company in the world. Do you want to talk about that? Because your commitment to education is impressive.
Yes, I think, there was some thought leader who said that the largest company in the world in a few years will be an education company. And that doesn't mean, a startup which will suddenly grow into $1 billion mammoth corporate, but maybe somebody like HP or somebody else who's already in the space of technology, but will pivot into education. So yes, I think, for us, education has been very centered to our entire sustainability strategy. I think that's one industry sector which we treat very differently from the rest, because we don't just focus on the commercial side of education, but also on what impact we can make to students, to teachers, to other constituents of the education ecosystem, which is, the NGOs, the public sector, the private sector.
So as a collective enterprise, what you've seen, and you can try, like I said, you were the godfathers of the birth of technology sector in the world, from that very small garage in Palo Alto, if I'm not mistaken, and when I think about everything that you've seen through the fullness of time, what do you see? I mean, many people have evangelized about the future of education being X or Y or Z, and I get very irritated with these conversations, actually. But there is a truth in that the pandemic has certainly made us think in terms of, well, is this the best way to deliver it? Because we were all kind of trusted and left to our own devices, as it were, to actually go and think about how delivery of education could change and could improve. And so the question is, you as a corporate citizen, a corporate leader, who has that history, what is it that you see, and how will the delivery of education change in your views?
So I think you're right. COVID created this perfect storm, and we are in this period of creative destruction where the whole structure has in some ways imploded on itself, but we're seeing a plethora of innovation coming out of it. And I think we had to very quickly pivot from a brick and mortar environment into a bytes and pixel environment. And that was a huge change that was expected out of the education sector in general. But there's no going back now, right? It's going to be a hybrid environment in which we're going to operate. And therefore, just to our subject, right? There were some buzzwords, but those buzzwords are now going to become center stage in the classroom. For example, blended learning. We use this term, this fad term for the last maybe 20 odd years, but nobody really implemented it in its true sense. But today, I think because we have now got so used and habitual to using technology, and it's become part of the fabric of the classroom, blended learning is here to stay, which just means that hardware, software, and the ability to integrate all of that to create outcomes is now become, part and parcel of the classroom, which also means that, you need to digitize content, because without that, all of this technology which is seeping into the classroom is going to remain an unloaded weapon, so as to speak. So how do you make sure that content is being digitized at a war scale, so that the systems that are coming into the classroom are able to ingest that, absorb that, and create those learning pathways on the digital platforms, so that now the student has the power of deciding his or her journey, which means that you can now create a flipped classroom. So, one step leads to the next, like, this whole Russian doll structure, which, you open one layer and the next layer is starting to unreveal itself. And then, because now the student is going to become, take ownership of their journey, you're going to start seeing more modular courses becoming center stage as well. So micro credentials and modular courses will now become more commonplace, because students are going to decide their pace of learning, their style of learning, their ability to blend everything that they want together in one ecosystem. So that is absolutely the fundamental foundational layer for me. But this is just what's going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years. But beyond that, anywhere the technology comes, you're going to start seeing machine learning come in, artificial intelligence come in, which means we'll now start creating personalized pathways. So we've already started that in the infancy, but the true power of one, to that particular student, their style, their weaknesses, their strengths, everything, understanding that, and then creating a fabric for them is what's going to be the next sort of step. And along with that, virtual reality is going to come into the classroom as well. So the minute you have virtual reality come in, you now are going to create a more equitable environment, because now you can have a kid sitting in a village in India or Ethiopia interact with somebody sitting in Dubai or Singapore and start to solve global problems at a local level. So you are now talking of really the power of technology being harnessed. So, you start having personalized pathways, you start having virtual classroom or virtual reality come into the classrooms. So campuses disappear, because everything becomes a campus, right? Inside the home, outside the home, inside the classroom, outside the classroom. It's now becoming ubiquitous everywhere. And which also means that tech companies like ourselves will start playing a bigger role in imparting of technology or imparting of education, in a sense. So IBM has led the way with that. Microsoft, HP are doing the same things, that you're bolting on credentials on top of a program, right? So you could have an internship with us, and you could end up having a job offer at the end of the day based on either the internship or a modular structured pathway that you've taken with us. And I also see scholastic esports becoming center stage, because that's where the audience is sitting today. Your students are sitting in that environment. So you're now starting to see professors and teachers starting to as well establish camp on something like Twitch and impart classroom lessons there. And eventually all of that is going to get wrapped up in education as a service. How do we assist you from the minute you're born to the minute you stop wanting to learn, which is going to be a lifetime, right? So how do we keep up with you at every stage of your life?
My mind is blowing up. I mean, you've said so much there that I want to dig into. But before we go there, I just want to, what I love about the T4 TV format is that you have people watching from all over the world. And I just want to take the opportunity to say hello to a few people who are there. So Amir has tuned in from Oman. I don't know where you're from, Susie, but you say, wow, thank you so much. I assume you mean, the dapper style of Mayank as opposed to mine. Afreen, hi, this is awesome. Thank you so much. Akeem is dialing in from or logging on from Nigeria. Nina is from Libya. Carl is one of our country ambassadors from the Philippines. And on it goes. Yasmin from Egypt, which is fantastic. From Syria, which is, Mayank, you're based in the UAE. These are people in your neighborhood. So you have from Palestine, and again, one of my colleagues from Buenos Aires is up, and she's logging on and watching. And here's one of our other country ambassadors from Argentina, actually. And we have Ali Besson from Tunisia, from Romania. And so you could see there's an incredible spread of people who have joined us and friends who have joined us from all over the world on our platforms. So if you have any questions for Mayank on anything he has said, just leave a comment and I will flash it up, and Mayank will hopefully try to answer these things, and we should get to it. And so when he talks about Mayank, I want to go back to what you said around things like, the technological revolution that is happening. But would you not say that that's more apparent and evident in higher education as opposed to in school education, K-12 education, it's called? Because when I think about the kind of context that we work in, say in Africa, for example, which is also part of your region in terms of what you look after, are these what you said applicable to schools in that region? Is what I'm trying to understand.
So I think the rate of change is higher in K-12 because, yes, higher ed had obviously adopted technology earlier. But if you see who's now taking on the mantle and who's, as a sector, I think K-12 is now leading the way forward because they've had to, right? They have had far more students who were far more ill-equipped for the current environment. So they had to be creative, whether using Telegram, like you said, or WhatsApp, or, using just a television to be brought to, or radio to broadcast, or creating center places in a village where students would come and be able to download material and then go back home, study it, and then come back to that, town hall and upload it. So we have seen so many creative things happening in Africa, and almost 90% of them have been in the K-12 sector. So to me, that's really where the action is right now.
And so we push on this conversation, and we know that this change that we're looking at in terms of the delivery of education, it seldom just happens because of one actor. And you often talk about ecosystems, and so the question really is about what should the education ecosystem that involves the public sector, so government, do in partnership with educators, nonprofits, businesses. What is your philosophy on how these actors come together to actually get over the line on some of the biggest education challenges that we have?
Absolutely, because this is a problem that not a single one of us can solve on our own. So, we need to collaborate on this. We need to make sure that we are, the whole is greater than the sum, right, in that sense, and of the individual parts. So I think, the recent summit that the UN held in Paris on transforming education really laid it out very clearly, right? They put 5 pathways out, and I'm going to, refer to my notes because I don't want to get it wrong. So I think, the first thing that they said was that you need to create inclusive, equitable, safe, and healthy schools. And I know this is, very close to your heart, Vikas, because you always speak about creating stronger schools, and that will, be 50% of the solution, if not, greater than 50% of the solution. So I think that is, probably the absolute fundamental layer that we need to get right, because everything else that's going to come is going to be a wrapper on top of that. But, how do you create this base to be the strongest, the school to be the right, environment for a child to feel safe and to learn? Because while you've given access to learning, I don't know whether we have truly crossed the path where students are learning. So access has been taken care of, but learning in its entirety, in its reality, is probably what we need to solve now. And to some extent, I'm going to start using examples of what we have been doing, which speak to these, because we have tied up with Girl Rising, which is an NGO which looks at gender sensitization, and we really, through them, create these safe environments for girls to come to school, for boys to understand what it means to be of the opposite gender and the challenges that they face. And we do this through storytelling. So we've got a series of 10 stories which are then used as models around which questions are put and around which discussions happen in the classroom. We also have something called the School Improvement Coach, which basically looks at creating a platform, a digital platform for a school to put their agenda on, which all the teachers can contribute towards and say what they're doing towards it. It can also be monitored by the state government or the Ministry of Education if they so wish, right? So if the Ministry of Education has put out a clear mandate on creating safe schools or equitable schools, and they want to see what each school is doing as an action, this platform creates that ability to do that rather than having to go physically into each school. So suddenly you can now solve this problem at scale. The second thematic action that the UN proposed was to look at teachers and the teaching profession. And I think this was the most impacted during COVID, right? Teachers were just thrown in the deep end and, in a sense, almost not given a lifeline and asked to find their own way. And that has its pros and its cons. I think the stresses that the teacher have gone through are incredible, right? And it's not been easy for them. The positive side is that some of them have come out with such creative solutions which you wouldn't have if you weren't pushed into a corner. And equally, the respect for teaching as a profession has gone up remarkably, right? Teachers are seen in a new light. Everybody has a newfound respect for what they do and for the care that they do it with. And we realized that we needed to play a part here as well. So we launched HP Idea just at the start of COVID, because what we said is that teachers have had a certain way of teaching. They know the outcomes that they want, but how do we help them realize those outcomes through technology or through creating digital pathways? How do we get them to be more resilient, more innovative? So the HP Idea program is a program that lasts for an entire academic year. Teachers who go on that program are actually titled as HP Idea Fellows when they graduate out of the program. And that is because they've gone through a complete transformative journey. They're completely different individuals and they come at the end of that tunnel. And the school transforms as well because of them, because we change the culture, right? We also have something called the HP Online Teaching Assistant, which we have done in various languages, and teachers can just go onto the platform and absorb that. So, we've even got that as a quick fix as well. The third thing that the UN recommended was to look at learning and skills for life, work, and sustainable development. And that's something that we have been taking on as a mantle for a very long time. So we have something called HP Life, which is a set of modules for entrepreneurship. And we partner with various governments, with various organizations. As an example, in Tunisia, we run something called Mashuri, where we have tied up with the ministry and USAID and UNDP to create a platform for youngsters to become entrepreneurs. So we give them the skills, we give them a bit of support from the government and from USAID, and then we help them launch their careers. And we've got some fantastic success stories there. And beyond that, for K-12 students, we've got the HP Innovation Garage, we've got the HP Gaming Garage, where skills around STEM and around game development and game design are taught. So we've got this happening on the third sort of thematic action that the UN had recommended. I'm just going to touch on the other two before I know you're dying to ask a few questions. I can see your brain coming into action. Or do you want me to stop here and take on these three?
Yeah, what you're painting is an incredible story about a company's commitment to education, for sure. All these fantastic programs that are being rolled out in countries and that are having impact. My ire, actually, and I'm sure this is not the same view that you have, which is around the role of the government and ministries of education. And they're the biggest voice, the biggest actor, because 99% of all education is delivered by government. When you talk about ecosystem, I mean, do they care about an ecosystem? Are they welcoming of approaches like this?
In my personal experience, yes, absolutely. Because, we launched HP Idea as a program just 2 years back. Today, we are in 19 countries, and all of them almost in partnership with the Ministry of Education. Okay. So it has been almost surprising the level of support we have got. In Ghana, as an example, it's now got the status where if you attend the program, you get national credit points against your own personal journey as a teacher, which sets you up for your next promotion. In Rwanda, all the 120 master trainers from the ministry have gone through the program so that they can impart that to other teachers and so on. So in our experience, that's been fabulous. We've got the HP Literacy Attainment Coach running in 7 countries, again with the Ministry of Education as pilots. I think the handicap that sometimes some of the ministries have is around financing, right? And that's again one of the thematic actions that the UN had put out, and that I think becomes the biggest stumbling block, because any ministry has the ambition to give a device to every student, to every teacher, to digitize the classroom, right? To create digital pathways for students to learn. But you might just be constrained by the resources that you have. And I think that is where, again, this whole ecosystem needs to come in and formulate something that supports the government in taking education more mainstream. And for example, we are launching the Teacher First Time Buyer program, and that supports teachers to be able to buy devices in an easy monthly installment scheme. But also on top of that, they get learning pathways that we've created for them. They get data from a telco provider. So, it creates a bundle which sets them up for success. So So yes and no is the answer to your question. I think most ministries want to do the right thing. Some of them are constrained by their context.
So we have some really interesting comments. So here's a lady called Briha Zainab saying, public schools are dependent on government policies and funds for any change. Instead of establishing a special schools for special needs children, need is to make already existing schools inclusive. Curriculum should have a space for entrepreneurial skills. Thank you so much, Briha, for sharing that. We have a few others, but again, I go back to this point, and I want you to touch on this because you and I have discussed this, which is around foundational literacy and numeracy and how we really need to focus on this. Do you have a view on how we can address this so that our audience can learn from you?
I think this is truly the burning platform we have, right? Because if education is supposed to be the agency of change, if you do not have literacy solved, how are children going to learn? And if they're not going to learn, how are they going to become agents of change, or how's anything going to transform? Because in the end, the transformation is going to happen at the center with the student right there in the middle, right? Otherwise, there's no transformation. So for me, this is absolutely the most base fundamental thing that we need to get right. And the perfect storm again here is that the biggest problem is in the low income countries, and that is where the resources are the least. The ability to scale something is not there. So how do you create systematic change? How do you collaborate with other constituents and players that can make a difference? And what we have tried to do is we have tried to launch something called the HP Literacy Attainment Coach. And that is a program that uses technology to solve this problem, right? What we do is we have rapid diagnostics. So today, if you have to assess a child's literacy index against a global parameter, it takes a couple of weeks for a qualified inspector to do, and that qualified inspector has to go school by school, child by child. But what we've done is that we've got our devices there. We've got a camera from a company called Explore. We've got Mirai as a company handling this for us, managing this for us, and you can now in 2 minutes, as a child reads a written script, understand where they stand on their literacy journey, and we can index that for the government. And so they can see that on our platform. So suddenly they know at a school level, at a district level, at a county level, where do things stand. And we don't just finish there with the rapid diagnostics. We actually then have an intervention program where we support the teachers in helping them to raise the literacy level of kids. And then we come back after 6 months and actually evaluate and give an assessment on where things were and where they have moved, right? And in countries where we have done this, in Ghana, for example, or Gambia, we have improved the literacy index by 40 percentile. That's huge improvement because the non-readers or the average reading was at 5%. We've taken it to 44.5%. So that's phenomenal. And the other part of this equation is, how do you develop native language literacy? Because you've got 2,000 languages being spoken in Africa. And 75 of them have over 1 million people who speak that language. So how do you create a safety net where they are more literate in their own language, because that creates the synapses at the back of the brain, and suddenly they're able to take on the second language, which could be English, right, where most of the education is happening. So suddenly you empower them to adopt a second language because you have helped create literacy in the first language. And for that, we have tied up with a company called Nabu, which creates storybooks in the native language. We in fact launched the HP Nabu Creative Lab in Kigali recently. And there we've got creators, illustrators coming together, creating native language storybooks, which now help children to understand their own language better.
Mayank, thank you for that. You referred to it earlier, is that, I've come to the conclusion that the way we transform education is by transforming our schools. And so there's a conversation that we should have, given who you are and what you do, about transforming these schools digitally. If you were to give advice to a school leader or a teacher as to how they approach this, what are the three things that they need to think about, when they think about digital transformation of schools from your experience? And on that note, we will end this interview, but because I know we have a series of these conversations that are coming up. But I do want you to tell us, in terms of from your experience, if I was a school leader, I wanted to transform my school, how would I do it?
So I think the first thing one should not do is blindly throw technology at it, right? So it almost seems counterintuitive for me to say that.
Correct.
But I think it's important for the school leader to understand what is their context, right? What is the environment they're operating in? What do they want to create as an objective? And it's always good to benchmark it, right? So in the context of Africa, for example, you could take the CESA goals, the Continental Education Strategy of Africa goals, which has 12 strategic objectives. So just if you look at those 12 strategic objectives and say, okay, where is my school mapping against these 12 outcomes that the ministry or the Africa Union wants us to achieve? So that becomes really the first step, right? Where do you want to be? Your larger ambition. And again, benchmarked against something tangible and credible. Then where are you at? You need to answer the second part of that equation. Where are you currently at in your context? So in reality, a gap analysis, and together with that, an identification of the critical steps that you need to do to bridge that gap. So this is step one and step two. Step three is the assessment of what can be taken on immediately, right? What are the incremental things that you can do? Because not everything needs something shiny and new to come in. A lot of schools might even have devices which are sitting in, which just need to be refreshed, right? Reach out to a company like us to see if we can help refresh those for you. You might already have a network operating within your school. It just might need a little bit more bandwidth, right? So what are the small incremental things that you can do? And then, you have your entire strategy and plan, and I'm simplifying it, of course. You then deploy that plan. But the minute you deploy the plan, you start again iterating, right? So you start looking at, okay, if this succeeds in 3 months, what do I need to pivot to next, right? So it needs to be constant evaluation and iteration of that plan. So really, these are the 5 fundamental steps. And we actually have something called the HP Digital Pedagogy Coach, which is a program for school leaders and teachers to embark on a journey on creating a schematic for themselves. And we help them create that schematic. We leave it for them to deploy it. But we come back after a year to see how they're doing and handhold them a little bit further if they want to. So to me, that's really the fundamental building block.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Mayank, and I've learned a lot, as always, when I speak to you. But the thing that really strikes me is that there's a lot that you can actually learn from a company like HP as an educator. It's not just about procuring of devices or software. You've actually put in place very constructive programs to help teachers upskill, build their capacity for these issues, which on behalf of the teaching profession, I thank you for, you and your colleagues for. And so thank you for that. And your commitment towards wider societal goals, I think, is admirable. And, please know that in T4, you have a partner for that to help you accelerate and drive the results that you want. The key thing that I learned actually from you today is that change is possible. And actually by bringing people together who actually this ecosystem that we talked about, I think we can transform education. But to me, that's on the basis of making sure that schools are stronger, as what you have referred. Mayank, thank you. Please know, on behalf of my colleagues and I and all the teachers in the T4 community, we are grateful to you for your support of this series, as well as for Teacher Tech Summit that took part in March that you spoke at. And we look forward to the forward discussions that we have planned. Thank you. And any last words of advice for our teacher friends?
No, thank you so much, Vikas. It's always a pleasure to have these chats with you. And, I'm grateful for the opportunities that you provide to HP and to the wider education community. And really, the final words I would say is that, change is possible. Just every teacher needs to adapt that mentality of innovation, resilience. And I think, they are the biggest agencies of change that we have. And huge respect to them, huge shout out to them for everything that they do and for the world they're creating for us.
Well, thank you so much. We end on your excellent video again. And I look forward to the next opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
One university in the United States conducted a study in Africa, and they said that we have over 100 years to catch up with the rest of the world.
We realized that our public school teachers needed huge upskilling. The main question is, could it be done by just starting from the basics?
The birth of this program was to support the teachers in their journey to embrace these new technologies that are coming into the classroom. The HPID program runs for a full academic year. We actually asked them to take on a project which they would like to prototype and solve a community problem.
This program seeks to help teachers build new concepts, have different skills in teaching their students. Let your innovation be something very simple that seeks to address a problem in your school that will help every student you have.
We are teachers. we have our own intellect. So what they did for the whole of 1 year is they opened our minds to the possibilities.
Teachers recognize that they can be change makers in their classroom. When you have the framework, you can do anything.